They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I think it's best served in a sterile beige conference room on a polished mahogany table right between the complimentary water carafe and the box of tissues they thoughtfully provide for the person they're about to professionally execute. The air in that room was thick with the scent of cheap air freshener and corporate cowardice. It was the smell of my career ending. Across the table, Shane, my director, was wearing his favorite expression, a condescending smirk that he probably practiced in the mirror, the kind that said, "I have an MBA and you don't." Beside him, Arthur Vance, the vice president of human resources, looked profoundly uncomfortable, his eyes darting anywhere but at me. He was a man who preferred to manage human capital from the safety of a spreadsheet, not face to face. Shane slid a thin folder across the table. It stopped a few inches from my hands. My performance review. Or, as I would later learn it was being called, the justification. He cleared his throat, a theatrical sound in the dead quiet of the room. He began to read. The words were a masterpiece of corporate fiction, a tapestry woven from lies and half-truths, lack of attention to detail, failure to meet critical deadlines, inability to collaborate with the team. Each phrase was a carefully chosen stiletto, designed to slip between the ribs of my 15-year career at this company and puncture its heart. He spoke of Project Titan, our flagship logistics platform, and how its recent instability was a direct result of my antiquated methods and resistance to innovation. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just kept my hands folded on the table, my posture straight, my breathing even. I'd learned a long time ago that in a corporate setting, the first person to lose their temper loses the war. Shane's voice droned on, a smug monotone that was far more insulting than any shout could ever be. He was enjoying this. For the past 6 months, he had been the ghost in my machine, the invisible hand that tipped the board just enough for my pieces to slide off. I knew it. I just couldn't prove it. Until I could. He finished his little speech with a sigh of feigned regret. He looked at Arthur, who then turned to me, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. It's a funny thing seeing a man whose kids' college funds you helped secure with the profit from projects you led look at you as if you're a stranger, a line item to be deleted. He said the words. The ones I knew were coming. The company had decided to move in a different direction. They were terminating my employment, effective immediately. He pushed a thicker envelope toward me. The severance package, the hush money. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I reached down to the leather satchel at my feet, the one I'd carried to this office every day for a decade and a half. I pulled out my own file. It wasn't thin. It was a 3-inch, 3-ring binder, heavy and dense with facts. The plastic cover was cool and smooth under my fingertips. I placed it on the table with a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the silent room. Both men flinched. Shane's smirk faltered for the first time. He looked at the binder, then at me. "What is that?" "My file," I said. My voice was calm, level. "You've presented your story. I thought it was only fair that I present mine." Before he could object, I opened it. The first page wasn't a document. It was a photograph, a network diagram of Project Titan that I had designed, so complex it looked like the circulatory system of a small god. Tucked into the corner of the page was a small brass plaque, Innovator of the Year 2018. My name was engraved on it. I flipped the page. It was a timeline, 2 columns. The left column was titled Project Deadlines. The right column was Anomalies. I started to speak, my voice just as measured as Shane's had been, but without the smugness. On March 12th, 48 hours before the quarterly update for our client Sterling Manufacturing, the primary user authentication module was corrupted. I worked for 36 hours straight to rebuild it from a clean backup. I noted the time of the corruption, 2:17 a.m. Shane scoffed. "Mistakes happen, Nathaniel. That's what we're talking about." I ignored him, my eyes on Arthur. On April 3rd, the night before the deployment of the inventory management patch, the entire staging server was wiped. Not corrupted. Wiped clean. I managed to restore it from a tertiary backup I kept off-site, a practice you once called paranoid in a team meeting, Shane. We only missed the deadline by 2 hours. I noted the time of the server wipe, 11:43 p.m. I flipped another page. "Here's an email from you, Shane, sent on April 4th, commending me for my heroic effort in fixing a catastrophic hardware failure." I then pointed to the next document, and here is the report from the data center's own sysadmins. There was no hardware failure. The command that wiped the server was a deliberate remote execution, a rm-rf command, not an accident. Arthur Vance was no longer looking uncomfortable. He was looking alarmed. He leaned forward, trying to read the papers upside down. Shane's face had lost its color. He tried to bluster. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to deflect from your own incompetence." "Am I?" I flipped to the next section. It was titled Access Logs. I'd spent weeks cultivating a quiet friendship with a junior admin in IT, a young guy named Kevin whom I'd once helped with a complex scripting problem. He owed me a favor, a small one. He'd simply shown me how to properly query the VPN access logs, something my senior architect credentials already gave me permission to do. No one had ever thought to look. The logs were cross-referenced with the file modification timestamps from my timeline, March 12th, 2:17 a.m. VPN connection established from an IP address registered to a residential address in Northwood. Your address, Shane. File modification on the authentication module logged 17 seconds later. April 3rd, 11:43 p.m. Another VPN connection from your home IP. The server wipe command executed 30 seconds after that. I had more. I had a dozen more instances, each one a nail. A deleted database index here, a reverted code branch there. Every single time, a major deadline was looming. Every single time, Shane's VPN was active just moments before the event. And every single time, an email would follow from him, either chastising me for the error or praising me for fixing it, building his paper trail for this very meeting. I saved the best for last, the final section. Project Titan, final build. 2 weeks ago, right before the final presentation that would secure the client's 5-year renewal, the core data routing file disappeared. This was the one that almost broke me. It was the heart of the system. I had to rebuild it from memory in fragmented code snippets. It was a nightmare. "Here's the server record showing the file deletion," I said, my voice dropping a little. "And here is the access log. But this time, you were smarter, Shane. You didn't use the VPN. You were in the office. The log shows the command was executed from a terminal in your own office at 10:15 p.m. on a Sunday." I slid one last piece of paper across the table. It was a printout from the building's security system, a time-stamped photo. It showed Shane swiping his access card to enter the building at 10:02 p.m. that Sunday. It showed him leaving at 10:20 p.m. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. Arthur Vance was staring at the photo, his face pale and slack. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Shane was just sitting there, frozen. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a fish pulled from the water, gasping in an alien environment where his rules no longer applied. The meeting to fire me was over, but the hearing, my hearing, had just begun. I still lost my job that day. They couldn't undo that process, not with the paperwork already filed. But as I walked out of that building for the last time, leaving the smoldering wreckage of my manager's career behind me, I didn't feel like a man who had been fired. I felt like a man who had won. He wanted to erase my work, so I immortalized his crimes. He lost his directorship. He lost his reputation. And his very public, very humiliating demotion to a junior project manager in a forgotten department became the stuff of company legend. But before I get into the quiet satisfaction of that fallout, and the months of silent, meticulous work it took to build my case, do me a favor. If you've ever been underestimated or had your work undermined, let me know in the comments. I read them all. And make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss the details of how a simple log file can become a weapon of mass destruction. The drive home was surreal. The world outside my car windows seemed impossibly normal. People were walking dogs, heading into coffee shops, living their lives, completely oblivious to the fact that my own professional world had just been detonated and I was the one holding the match. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but a tremor was running through my whole body. The delayed shock of a battle fought and won, but at a tremendous cost. I was jobless. After 15 years of loyal service, of early mornings and late nights, of canceled vacations and missed school plays, I was unemployed. The severance package they'd hastily renegotiated in that frantic post-binder haze was generous, obscenely so. It was their panic converted into currency, but it felt like blood money. It felt like an admission of guilt they would never make public. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at my house, a modest 2-story colonial I'd been able to afford because of the job I no longer had. My wife Sarah would be inside, probably worrying. I had told her the meeting was today. I hadn't told her about the binder. I hadn't told anyone. It was a secret I had carried alone for months, a weight that had settled deep in my bones. Some secrets are a burden. This one had been a shield. Walking into my own home felt like crossing a finish line I never wanted to reach. The smell of coffee and the faint sound of a news channel from the living room, the familiar comfort of it all felt alien. Sarah met me in the hallway, her face etched with concern. She didn't have to ask. She saw it in my eyes. She just wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time that day, the rigid control I'd maintained finally cracked. I didn't break down, but I leaned into her. The full weight of the last 6 months, the betrayal, the fight, pressing down on me. "I lost my job," I said into her hair, my voice rough. She held me tighter, and I said, "I destroyed Shane's career in the process." That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in my workshop in the garage, the one place that was truly mine. The smell of sawdust and wood stain was a comforting balm. I ran my hand over the smooth, unfinished surface of a cherry wood bookshelf I was building for my daughter. My hobby was woodworking. I loved the precision of it, the patience it required. You can't rush wood. You have to understand its grain, its strengths, its weaknesses. You have to make careful, deliberate cuts. One mistake, one moment of impatience, and you can ruin a piece you've spent weeks on. In a way, that's how I had approached the situation with Shane. It hadn't started as sabotage. It had started with his arrival. Our company, a mid-sized but highly respected player in logistics software, had been acquired by a larger, more impersonal tech conglomerate a year ago. With the acquisition came new leadership, which meant a wave of people like Shane. He was everything I wasn't. He was young, slick, with a sharp suit and an MBA from a school that cost more than my house. He spoke in a language of synergies, paradigm shifts, and leveraging core competencies. He saw the company not as a collection of people and products, but as an assembly of assets to be optimized. And I, with my 15 years of institutional knowledge, was apparently not an asset. I was a legacy cost. The first time it happened, I genuinely thought it was my fault. We were a week out from a major client demo, a potential 8-figure deal. I was working on a critical data migration script. I'd tested it a dozen times. It was perfect. I went home, feeling confident. The next morning, I came in to find the script had been altered. A single line of code had been changed. A simple but deadly error that would have duplicated every single entry in the client's primary database, corrupting it beyond easy repair. My blood ran cold. I caught it, just in time, but it cost me a full day to fix and re-verify everything. Shane called me into his office. He had that look on his face, the concerned but disappointed manager. "Nathaniel," he'd said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We can't afford mistakes like this. The client would have been crippled. You're one of our senior guys. I expect better." I just nodded, my stomach in a knot. I apologized. I told him it wouldn't happen again. I spent the next week racking my brain, wondering how I could have been so careless. I was known for my meticulousness. It was my brand. The idea that I'd made such a rookie error was humiliating. Then, a month later, it happened again. This time it was a set of key configuration files for Project Titan. They weren't corrupted, they were just gone, vanished from the server. I had backups, of course. I always had backups. But restoring them and integrating them back into the live environment took hours, pushing our update schedule to the brink. Again, Shane was there, shaking his head. "This is becoming a pattern, Nathaniel. Maybe the workload is getting to be too much for you. Maybe we need to reevaluate your role on this project." That was the moment the first seed of suspicion was planted. It wasn't the accusation that did it. It was his eyes. There was a flicker of something in them. Not concern, not disappointment. It was satisfaction, a glint of triumph. He was enjoying this. The idea was so monstrous, so brazenly unethical, that my mind initially rejected it. Why would he do that? He was the director. If my project failed, it reflected poorly on him. It didn't make logical sense, but the feeling lingered. This is where people might question my judgment. Why didn't I go to HR then? Why didn't I raise the alarm? The answer is simple, and I think understandable to anyone who has worked in a large corporation for more than a few years. An accusation without proof is career suicide. I was the old guy, he was the new star. I would have sounded like a disgruntled, paranoid employee trying to blame his own mistakes on the new boss. They would have launched an investigation which would have consisted of asking Shane if he did it. He would have said no, and I would have been branded as not a team player, as a problem. I would have been managed out of the company within 6 months. He mistook my patience for weakness. It was the biggest mistake he ever made. So I decided not to make an accusation. I decided to gather evidence. I decided to build a case. I would let him think he was getting away with it. I would let him build his narrative against me, while I quietly built my own. One built not on hearsay and opinion, but on the cold, hard, immutable language of servers and data. The catalyst that turned this from a defensive measure into an offensive plan came not from a server log, but from a text message. I was at my daughter's soccer game, trying to push the gnawing anxiety of my work situation out of my mind, when my phone buzzed. It was from Maria, a brilliant young data analyst on my team. I'd hired her straight out of college 4 years earlier. I saw the spark in her, the same passion for solving complex puzzles that had driven me my whole career. I'd mentored her, guided her, and now she was one of the most promising talents in the company. Her text was short and frantic. "Shane just pulled me into a meeting. He wanted me to review your recent check-ins for the Titan project. He was pointing out inefficiencies and redundant code. He was trying to get me to agree with him. It felt wrong, like he was building a case. I just played dumb. What's going on?" Reading that message, a cold fury washed over me. It was one thing to attack me. It was another thing entirely to try and poison my own team against me, to try and use a bright, loyal person like Maria as a pawn in his disgusting little game. He wasn't just trying to get me fired, he was trying to erase my legacy, to salt the earth of my reputation so nothing would ever grow there again. He wanted to make it look like he was the one who had to clean up my mess. That was the moment my resolve hardened from a shield into a spear. This was no longer about survival. It was about justice. I texted her back, "Thanks for the heads up, Maria. Just focus on your work, document everything, and don't trust anything he says." I went home that night and began to build my binder. I knew the systems, I had helped design many of them. I knew where the digital ghosts lived. I started by setting up a simple automated script on my local machine. It did one thing. Every 5 minutes it would run a checksum on my entire project directory on the shared server and log the result to a private file. A checksum is like a digital fingerprint. If a single bit in a file changes, the fingerprint changes. It was my silent, unblinking sentinel. Next, I dug into the company's internal documentation, which I had administrative access to. I found the IP address ranges for the corporate VPN. I wrote them down. I made a list of every critical file, every key database table, every configuration setting for Project Titan. I created a mental map of Shane's sabotage. He wasn't a technical genius. He was a vandal. He wasn't building anything. He was just throwing rocks. He knew just enough to be dangerous. He knew what files to delete or what lines to change to cause the most chaos with the least chance of being immediately traced to a specific person. What he didn't count on was that I was the architect. I knew the location of every load-bearing wall and every hidden vulnerability in the system because I had put them there. I started living a double life. By day, I was Nathaniel, the beleaguered senior architect, struggling to keep his projects on track, fending off Shane's passive-aggressive comments and projecting an air of a man who was getting worn down. I'd sigh in meetings. I'd look tired. I let him think his campaign was working, that I was losing a step, that he was winning. But at night, I was a different person. I became a digital archaeologist, sifting through layers of server logs, cross-referencing timestamps, and connecting the dots. It was slow, meticulous work. It required the same patience as sanding a fine piece of hardwood, moving slowly, carefully, until the true grain was revealed. I'd find a file modification timestamp from my checksum logger, 2:17 a.m. I'd then pull the server's own security logs for that file, access by user S. Thorne. Then I'd pull the VPN logs for that exact time, connection from IP address 71, 2:16 a.m., disconnected at 2:19 a.m. I'd do a quick public lookup on the IP, registered to a residential ISP in Northwood. I'd open the company directory, Shane Thorne, address 124 Willow Creek Lane, Northwood. Check. Another brick in the wall. This is what Shane and the company failed to understand. They saw me as an old-school programmer, a guy who understood legacy code. They were right, but they missed the other half of the equation. To build and maintain complex systems for 15 years, you don't just learn how they work. You learn how they break. You learn to think like the chaos, to anticipate the points of failure. And Shane, for all his MBA jargon, was just another point of failure, a bug in human form. And I was the most experienced debugger in the company. My relationship with Maria became my lifeline. I never told her the full story, not then. I didn't want to put her in a compromised position. But I used her as a sounding board and an occasional resource, always under the guise of work. I'd send her an email, "Hey Maria, seeing some weird latency on the staging server. Can you pull the raw access logs from between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. last night? I'm trying to track down a performance bottleneck. She'd send me the log file, no questions asked. She trusted me. She was helping me build the case against Shane without even knowing it. She was my inside woman, and her innocence was her protection. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that elevated my plan from simple revenge to a strategic takeover, was the client. Specifically, Greg Stilton, the COO of Sterling Manufacturing, the client who used Project Titan. Greg and I had worked together for over a decade. Our relationship wasn't just client-vendor. It was a partnership. We'd spent late nights in conference rooms with whiteboards, sketching out workflows. We'd shared bad airport coffee in a dozen cities. He didn't trust my company. He trusted me. He knew that when he called with an impossible problem, I was the one who would get on a plane and fix it. Shane, in his infinite wisdom, saw this relationship as a liability. He saw it as old-fashioned and lacking scalability. He wanted the client's loyalty to be with the brand, not with an individual employee. He started inserting himself into my calls with Greg, trying to talk over me, using his buzzwords. Greg, a no-nonsense former factory floor manager who'd worked his way up to the C-suite, had no time for it. I could hear the irritation in his voice. After one particularly painful call where Shane had spent 20 minutes talking about optimizing the value chain synergy, Greg called my cell phone directly. "What the hell is with the new suit, Nat? Does that guy actually do anything, or does he just talk?" I just laughed it off. "He's the new boss, Greg. Just smile and wave." But I filed that conversation away. It was another asset. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. A few weeks before the termination meeting, I knew the end was near. Shane's sabotage was becoming more frequent, more brazen. He was getting impatient. He needed his kill shot to justify bringing in his own guy, a younger, cheaper clone of himself. I took all my research, all my logs, all my screenshots, and I scheduled a 2-hour consultation with a labor lawyer. Not a flashy one, but a gray-haired bulldog who specialized in wrongful termination. I laid the binder on his desk. He spent an hour reading, his expression growing more and more grim. He'd occasionally let out a low whistle. When he was done, he looked up at me over his spectacles. "Mister," he said, "this is one of the most comprehensive, well-documented cases of constructive dismissal and workplace harassment I have ever seen. This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a public relations nightmare for them." He gave me a crucial piece of advice. "Don't sue. Not yet. Let them fire you. Let them think they have all the power. Sign their severance agreement, but we're going to add one small amendment to their standard non-disclosure agreement. The standard NDA prevents you from talking about company business. Our amendment will clarify that this does not and cannot apply to the disclosure of illegal activities or evidence of criminal misconduct. It's a subtle change. Their HR department will likely see it as standard and let it pass. But it gives you a shield. It means when the time comes you can tell the truth to the right people without fear of legal reprisal." Armed with my binder and my lawyer's advice, I was ready. I felt a strange sense of calm in those final days. I had done the work. I had made the careful, deliberate cuts. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the target to walk into it. When the email from HR arrived, summoning me to the conference room, I didn't feel dread. I felt a quiet, cold, and thrilling sense of anticipation. It was time to bring my file. The immediate aftermath in that conference room was a scene of controlled chaos. Arthur Vance, the HR VP, seemed to age 10 years in 10 minutes. He held up a hand to Shane, a clear stay put and shut up gesture. He looked at me, then at the binder, then back at me. His professional mask was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man staring into a legal and financial abyss. "Mr. Nathaniel," he said, his voice strained, "I think we need to pause this meeting." He asked me if I would be willing to accompany him to his office, alone. I nodded. As we walked down the hall, I could feel the eyes of my former colleagues on me. They saw me walking with the HR boss, Shane trailing behind like a sullen child being sent to the principal's office. The narrative was already shifting. I wasn't the disgraced employee being escorted out. I was something else, something they couldn't yet define. In Arthur's office, the pretense fell away completely. He closed the door, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and let out a long, shaky breath. He didn't offer me a seat. He just stood there, looking at my binder, which I had placed squarely in the middle of his large oak desk. "What do you want, Nathaniel?" he asked. The question was blunt, stripped of all corporate jargon. It was the question of a man who knew he had lost all leverage. "I want the severance package you were about to offer me," I said calmly. I want my vested stock options paid out in full, as of today, and I want a written formal apology from the company for the baseless accusations against my professional conduct. The last part was a bluff, but a good one. He didn't even argue. He was already thinking about damage control, about how to keep this from getting out. A lawsuit from me would trigger a discovery process, my binder would become public record, the trade journals would have a field day, their stock price would take a hit, Shane's career would be the least of their worries. He agreed to everything, with one condition, an ironclad non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. I agreed, but I told him my lawyer would need to review it. I pulled out the amendment my lawyer had drafted. It was a single paragraph, full of dense legalese, but its purpose was simple. It carved out an exception for discussing illegal acts. Arthur glanced at it, his eyes skimming the text. He was in such a hurry to put out the fire that he didn't see the kindling I was leaving behind. He agreed. He just wanted it over. They still had to follow through with the termination. The process was too far along to stop. But the terms of my exit had fundamentally, seismically shifted. I walked out of that office, signed their paperwork, and collected my personal effects from my desk. My team watched in silence, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Maria caught my eye. I gave her a very slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was all I could do. As I walked toward the elevator, Shane appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. I didn't wait to hear them. I just got in the elevator and went home. My silent takeover had begun. The first ripple effect was internal. Maria texted me that evening. They put the entire department on lockdown. It is pulling all of Shane's hard drives. There's an official internal investigation. They're calling it a data security review. Everyone knows what it really is. He's been suspended, pending the outcome. The panic at the company was palpable, even from the outside. Shane, in his desperation, had made a critical error. He hadn't just tried to frame me, he'd done it by attacking the company's most valuable asset, Project Titan. He had demonstrated that a single rogue director could cripple their biggest revenue stream. The board, the real power behind the conglomerate, would not see this as a simple HR issue. They would see it as a catastrophic failure of management and security. Shane hadn't just shot me. He'd shot himself, the company, and everyone around him, all at the same time. My first move was to do nothing. I took a week off. I spent time in my workshop. I finished my daughter's bookshelf. I took my wife out to dinner. I let the poison I had injected into their system do its work. I knew the corporate immune system would be in overdrive, trying to isolate the infection. My silence was my greatest weapon. They expected me to be angry, to be loud, to be a problem. By being quiet, I became a mystery, an unknown variable they couldn't control. Then, the panicked calls started. First, it was a mid-level manager from my old department. He was trying to sound casual, but his voice was tight with stress. "Hey Nat, just calling to see how you're doing. Listen, we're having a little trouble with the Titan patch. The new guy, the one Shane hired to replace you, he can't make sense of your documentation. The documentation was perfect. What he meant was, the new guy was incompetent." I was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, John, but I'm no longer an employee. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I wished him luck and hung up. The real panic became clear through Maria's updates. She had been interviewed by the internal investigators and a lawyer from corporate. She told them the truth, that I had always been a meticulous and careful leader, and that Shane had tried to pressure her into finding fault with my work. She was smart. She framed it not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. Her testimony, combined with my binder, was sealing Shane's fate. The public reveal came about 10 days after my firing. It wasn't a press release or a news story. It was subtler than that. A well-known industry blogger, someone who specialized in the logistics tech space, posted a short, cryptic article. It was titled "Trouble at the Titan Project." It spoke of rumors of management upheaval, key personnel departures, and instability in the platform that was the backbone for several major industry players. The blogger didn't name names, but he didn't have to. The article cited sources close to the project. I had a pretty good idea who those sources were. A few disgruntled engineers, probably. The story spread like wildfire through the niche but influential world of logistics tech. The company's carefully managed public image was starting to crack. They had successfully kept my firing quiet, but they couldn't contain the consequences. The silent takeover was working perfectly. The foundation was crumbling, not because I was blowing it up, but because I had simply walked away and taken the blueprints with me. The exodus began with a single email. It came from Maria 2 weeks after my departure. The subject line was simple, my notice. The email was short and professional. Nathaniel, I wanted to let you know I've resigned. I can't, in good conscience, continue to work under the current leadership. The environment has become toxic, and the project is being run into the ground. I hope you're doing well. Let me know if you land somewhere. I'd follow you anywhere. That email was a turning point. It wasn't just a loyal subordinate leaving a bad situation. It was the first domino. Maria was widely respected. She was the future of that department. Her leaving sent a powerful signal to the rest of the team. The ship is sinking. Over the next week, 2 more engineers from my old team quit. Both were senior guys, veterans I had worked with for years. They were the ones who truly understood the intricate guts of Project Titan. They didn't have to be poached. They weren't being disloyal to the company. The company had been disloyal to them by ousting their leader and creating a chaotic, untrustworthy environment. They both called me. The conversations were nearly identical. What's your next move, Nat? Because whatever it is, we're in. Suddenly, I wasn't just an unemployed engineer. I was the de facto leader of a small, elite, and very available team of specialists. We had the institutional knowledge of Project Titan that the company had just paid me a fortune to walk away with. It was the ultimate irony. They thought they were cutting a cost, but they had actually spun out their most valuable asset. The company's desperation reached its peak a few days later. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. I was right. Shane came the voice on the other end. It was him. He sounded terrible. His voice was raspy, frayed at the edges with panic and exhaustion. Nat, thank God. Listen, man, we need to talk. This has all been a huge misunderstanding. I stayed silent. I just let him talk. They're trying to pin everything on me, he said, his voice cracking. The investigation, the client complaints. They're railroading me. But we can fix this. I talked to Arthur. They're willing to make you a new offer, a big one. Come back. We can say the whole thing was a mistake. We can put the team back together. They'll even give you a senior director title, my title. I listened to his desperate, pathetic pleading. He was offering me the very thing he had stolen, as if it was his to give. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was about a title, about a job. He didn't understand that this was about respect. It was about the fundamental principle that you don't burn down the architect's house and then expect him to give you the blueprints to rebuild it. I let the silence hang in the air for a few long seconds. Then I said, just one word, no. His tone shifted instantly from pleading to anger. You can't do this, Nathaniel. You'll be in breach of your NDA. I'll sue you for slander. I cut him off, my voice as cold and hard as steel. Shane, I haven't said a single word to anyone outside that room. I haven't had to. You did all of this yourself. You built this mess, and now you have to live in it. Goodbye. I hung up the phone. The final power shift, the one that broke the company's back, came not from an engineer or a manager, but from the one person they had completely forgotten to factor into their calculations, the client. My cell phone rang an hour later. The caller ID said Greg Stilton. Nat, Greg's voice boomed through the phone. All business. What in the goddamn hell is going on over there? I've been trying to get a straight answer for a week. My system is throwing error codes I've never seen before, and they've assigned some kid to my account who sounds like he's 12 and thinks a server rack is a piece of furniture. I'm hearing rumors, man. They said you retired. You don't sound retired. I took a deep breath. Greg, I said, I can't discuss the details of my departure, but I can tell you this, I did not retire. And my 2 best senior engineers and my lead data analyst are also no longer with the company. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He was connecting the dots, the platform instability, the personnel exodus, the evasive answers from his new account manager. So let me get this straight, he said slowly. You, the guy who built this entire system from scratch, are gone. Your top 3 people are gone, and I'm left with Captain Buzzword and a team of interns to run the logistical backbone of my $100 million manufacturing operation. Is that about the size of it? That's about the size of it, Greg, I confirmed. He swore, a long creative string of words that was actually quite impressive. Then he got quiet again. So he said, his voice shifting from angry to strategic, what are you doing now, Nat? And more importantly, are you taking on new clients? The power had not just shifted, it had completed a 180-degree rotation. The game was over. All that was left was the final move. The final confrontation wasn't a confrontation at all, it was a business transaction. I told Greg Stilton the truth, or at least the part of it that didn't violate my NDA. I told him I was starting my own consulting firm. It didn't even have a name yet. It was just me, Maria, and the 2 other engineers, working out of my garage for the time being. I told him we could offer him unparalleled support for the Titan platform because we were the ones who had built it. Greg's response was immediate. Send me a proposal. I'll have my legal team look at it. As for our contract with your old company, let's just say it has a 30-day termination clause for a reason. They have failed to provide adequate support. That's a breach of contract. I want to be your first client. And just like that, it was done. My little unnamed startup had just landed a multi-million-dollar anchor client. We weren't just a handful of disgruntled ex-employees anymore. We were a viable business. We were the competition. We set up shop in a small leased office space in a nondescript business park. It wasn't glamorous. The paint was peeling, and the coffee maker was secondhand. But it was ours. The atmosphere was electric. We were a team of builders again, free from the bureaucracy and the politics that had stifled us. Maria was at a whiteboard sketching out a new architecture for a system module, debating animatedly with the other engineers. There was energy, there was respect, there was a sense of shared purpose. We were creating something new, built on a foundation of trust. The news of our new venture and our first major client hit the industry like a shockwave. A trade publication ran a small article, Stilton Manufacturing moves Titan platform support to new firm, Nexus Solutions. Nexus Solutions. That's what we decided to call ourselves. A point of connection. It felt right. The fallout at the old company was swift and brutal. Losing their flagship client was a massive blow to their revenue and their reputation. The board, which had previously ignored the internal politics, could not ignore the numbers. Arthur Vance, the HR VP, called me one last time. It was a strange, stilted conversation. He informed me, in a flat, official tone, that following a thorough internal review, Shane Thorne's employment with the company had been terminated. He was trying to frame it as them cleaning house, as them taking decisive action. I knew the truth. They hadn't fired him for what he did to me. They had fired him because he got caught, and because his actions had cost them a fortune. But the real vindication came a week later. Maria forwarded me an internal, company-wide email from the CEO of the parent conglomerate. It was a classic piece of corporate doublespeak, full of talk about restructuring for the future and realigning our strategic assets. But buried in the 3rd paragraph was the real news. Shane hadn't been fired. That would have been too clean, too merciful. A firing would allow him to collect unemployment, to quietly look for another job. No, they were far more creative than that. The email announced his new role: Shane Thorne, Junior Analyst, Legacy Systems Maintenance, reporting to the regional office in Omaha, Nebraska. It was a public execution. They hadn't just fired him, they had demoted him, humiliated him, and exiled him to a corporate Siberia. They took away his directorship, his team, his office, and his dignity, and they did it in front of the entire company. Everyone knew what it meant. It was a message. This is what happens when you fail, when you cost us money. Shane, the arrogant MBA who thought he was a master of the universe, was now in charge of making sure 20-year-old servers in a forgotten back office didn't overheat. His career wasn't just over, it was a ghost, cursed to haunt the hallways of the company he tried to conquer. He had mistook my patience for weakness, and in the end, that miscalculation cost him everything. My vindication wasn't in his fall, it was in my own rise. It was sitting in my new office, the one with my name on the door as president and founder, watching my team thrive. It was in the grateful calls from Greg, telling us our support was better than it had ever been. It was in the quiet satisfaction of building something better, something healthier, on the ashes of the old. They say you shouldn't burn bridges. Shane didn't just burn a bridge, he blew it up with C4 and then tried to sell tickets to the explosion. He forgot that I was the one who knew how to build a new one, stronger and more efficient than the last. He saw me as a relic, a piece of old hardware to be decommissioned. He failed to understand that experience isn't about being old, it's about having a deep, unshakable understanding of the fundamentals. And the most fundamental rule of all is that competence will always, eventually, find its own level. You can't suppress it, you can't fake it, and you certainly can't sabotage it without eventually getting buried in the rubble. So if you're out there feeling like your contributions are being ignored, like your experience is being treated as a liability instead of an asset, remember this story. Don't get angry, get meticulous. Don't raise your voice, raise your standards, document everything. Build your case, not with emotion, but with facts. Because in the end, corporations don't respect loyalty or passion. They respect leverage. And true, undeniable competence is the greatest leverage of all. They think a long career is a liability on a balance sheet, until the day they discover it was the only thing holding the whole structure up. Let me know your own story in the comments below. I truly do read them, and they remind me that none of us are alone in these battles. If you found some satisfaction in this, and you want to hear more stories about how the quiet ones can turn the tables on a system that's rigged against them, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because the world is full of Shanes, and we're just getting started telling the stories of how they get exactly what they deserve.